provide both a product and a service. Within the market data area, our product is a rules-based reporting product called MDR. Runs in AWS. It handles both monthly and quarterly exchange and vendor reporting for clients, as well as MISO. On the service side, we handle application assessments, data usage reviews, and traditional market data engagements. Under the regulatory compliance practice, we have a complete compliance solution, ECS. Also run in AWS, ECS provides regulatory reporting in compliance with the SEC's consolidated audit trail requirements, Rule 605 and 606, and also trade surveillance. And just recently, J&J was authorized by FINRA as a CAT reporting agent. As such, J&J is equipped to report data provided by our clients in multiple formats, including FIX. On the services side, we provide compliance consulting for a variety of issues, such as market access, OATS, CAT again, EBS, and we do annual testing for 3120 or supervisory controls. Under the industry solutions practice, J&J manages 3 associations. We handle the program office for the fixed trading community. We run the financial information forum, which is basically tied to both compliance and market data and focuses on the implementation issues impacting the industry. And then RICS-ML, which is similar to FIX, but more for the research community. That's a little bit about Jordan & Jordan, who we are and what we do. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Tom Jordan, who's the president of Jordan & Jordan. You might be on mute, Tom.
Yep, I have it. Unfortunately, the commissioner is not here yet, right, Deb, on this. And as some of you may know, the commissioner, when he left the commission, went to become a professor. And those of you know, you always give 10 minutes to the professor before you have to leave the class. So we're going to stay here for another 5 minutes. He's trying to get on right now. He's having some issues. So why don't we do this? We were going to have Kathleen Callahan, who runs the FIX community, end the session. And, after the commissioner and I had our conversation. So why don't we move that up now? And then when the commissioner hopefully comes on, we'll be able to go right to him. So Kathleen, if we could ask you to talk about the fixed trading community.
Sure. So we are going to talk about some of the events that we have going on. We have a series of webinars coming up in the future. As you can see from the slide that Deb showed, Improving Productivity is on April 29th. We also have a digital assets event on the 7th of May. There are 2 other webinars we have scheduled, dates to be confirmed, so we're going to ask you to please go ahead and take a look at the website, Fix Events at fixtrading.org, and we'll keep you updated there. For the balance of the year, we do have some of our events scheduled. Hong Kong on the 9th of July, Mumbai on September 3rd, CME Trading Conference on September 18th, and then Sydney on October 15th. So, but again, if you keep your eye on the events page on the website, we'll continue to update those with dates and the upcoming webinars. Tom, I see Commissioner Jackson has joined, so I'm going to turn it back to you, and then we can follow the other items after your conversation.
Perfect. Hi, Commissioner. How are you? It's good
I'm great, Tom. Good to see you.
Good seeing you. I told the people that after you left the commission, you became a professor, and we always have to give 10 minutes to a professor, right? You know,
that's exactly right. That's right.
That's exactly right. But it's great to see you. I know you had troubles getting in. So, but thanks for doing this. Thanks for your service to the country by 2 years at the commission. Before the commission, the commissioner was at Columbia Law School, and he was involved even in technology then, where he did some analysis in terms of transparency by looking at data. So there's a little bit of consistency to the background prior to his even being on the commission. Prior to that, he worked for the government before, U.S. Department of Treasury, something called TARP, which we're hearing about now. 2008, right? Remember we had a financial crisis back in 2008, and the government wound up investing $700 billion, which we thought was a lot of money back then, and now it's not as much money, and they actually used only $410 billion of it. So that was great. That was a great program to help the economy and hopefully we'll do it again in this time here. And before that, he was going to school. He had two degrees from University of Pennsylvania, a master's from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a law degree from the Harvard Law School. People in the audience today, and Commissioner, there's over 150 people on the call, will have an opportunity to ask questions. And what you do is the old-fashioned way, you raise your hand. Remember, like we used to do in school, and hopefully soon your kids will be able to do that back in school again. And I think if I remember right, Commissioner, your mom is a teacher, right? She's still teaching?
She actually retired after 31 years of teaching last summer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, good for her on that. But we're going to be able to ask questions, but the audience will. But let me just start, right, by asking a question about the audience, as I said, is over 150 people. And they're business people, and they're regulatory compliance people, and they're technology people. You know, the business people, their job is to grow the revenue. In fact, some of them are even called chief revenue officers on that. And then the compliance regulatory to make sure that the firms stay in compliance with the regulatory rules, whether they're state or federal or SEC or FINRA, whatever it might be. And then the technology people help both sides. They help the trading side and more all the way through the cycle. And they also help compliance regulatory. Could we start by talking about, your thoughts on the balance between business and regulation?
Sure. Well, first of all, Tom, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be a part of the discussion. Folks, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to spend time in person with this great group, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you. And Tom and I have been working on this for a long time. So it's such an important opportunity for me to hear from the business community about folks' reaction to everything we're living with. So thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. And Tom, I hope we can focus on getting some questions in from the audience to the degree technology allows us. I'd love to have a conversation. So your question was about the balance between regulation and business. And I should start by giving a little bit of my background. Before I was a lawyer or even a law student, I started my career on Wall Street. I was at Bear Stearns for a couple of years before I became an attorney and later went to the Treasury Department. And I can tell you, I always viewed the government as providing an important check on the market. But my experience often was that government could get in the way. And I was very sensitive when I was on the SEC and even when I was at Treasury to the idea that we want government to facilitate willing transactions among market participants and trust the judgment of people in the marketplace to do the right thing in hard moments, especially moments like this one. But let me say something about that, which is that in my experience over time, there have been a number of market-based reforms that have helped market participants improve what they do. So a classic example for me is Sarbanes-Oxley. A lot of people complained around the time Sarbanes-Oxley was passed, but I can tell you I had been on Wall Street before Enron and WorldCom happened. And there were some internal compliance and control abuses, guys, that needed to get into shape. And I think Sarbanes-Oxley really helped us do that. And I think the people who worry about the burdens of regulation, they have a point, don't get me wrong. But I think it's easy to overstate that case. And something to keep in mind is that we have an internal controls culture and accounting function and a compliance function, in part because the law nudged us in the right direction. Now, a lot of people are already moving that way, even before Sarbanes-Oxley. But a lot of the internal controls and protections and designs that we have came from that law. Or Tom, I'll give you another example. I grew up in New York. I'm originally from the Bronx. I lived through 9/11 in New York. I lived through the dot-com bubble in New York. I lived through 2008 in New York. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know about you guys. I've never lived through any moment like this as a New Yorker or as an American. And for all the problems on our economy right now, some of the institutions that are at the bedrock of our response and have done the right thing are our banks. Our banks are in much better shape today than they were a decade ago. Now, part of that is because many of the compliance people on the phone have helped keep banks in a position where they have the liquidity, they have the responsiveness, they have the technology to help businesses who are struggling with this. But Tom, I'd like to say another reason why is that some of the steps we took in Dodd-Frank in 2010 were the right thing to do. And because the government took some of those steps and made some hard decisions, our banks are in better shape today. And as a result, this is not a bank crisis. It's a health crisis. It's a corporate crisis. It's an economic crisis, but it's not a bank crisis. And one reason why is that the government took some hard steps. So my quick answer is it's a balance, like in all things, Tom. It's a balance. Government can go too far. Government cannot go far enough. But I think anybody who's being honest, who's in the marketplace and has been for the last 10 or 20 years, should acknowledge that for all its problems, government has helped the market do things a lot better today than it used to.
Okay, good. We were going to bring this up at the end, but since you brought it up, let's just go to it right now. How do you think the situation will change post-pandemic crisis in terms of the regulatory balance and the business? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, you broke up there a little bit. Could you say that again?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on post-pandemic? On how the environment will change?
Well, Tom, it's a funny thing. When I was an SEC commissioner, I try hard to follow this, but being an SEC commissioner doesn't come with a crystal ball. So my guess is as good as anybody else on this call, and you've got some people who are very close to the market and to companies. I'll offer my 2 cents, although I'm interested in the views other people have. I think there are some places that'll never be the same. I think New York might be one of those places where the steps we have to take in terms of safety, in terms of the way that people think about going to a restaurant, the way that people think about taking their kids to a school, the way that people think about having someone come into their home, all those things I think are likely to change. But we've always been able to make those adjustments. I mean, look, I don't know about you, Tom. I remember being a banker in 1999 and showing up at LaGuardia Airport 20 minutes before my flight. After 9/11, I don't do that anymore. Nobody does. Not if you want to make it. You want to make your flight. So I would say that some things are basically fundamentally going to change. But here's what's not going to change. What's not going to change is we have the most robust economy in the world. When I was an SEC commissioner, I would fly around to other countries and say, and talk to folks in Asia, Europe, South America, you name it. And they would say, Commissioner, how do we get a market like yours? How do we create an environment where companies can raise capital, can grow the economy, can employ workers, can change people's lives with technology? How do we create a market like that? And I think our markets will continue to be the envy of the world. That doesn't mean this is going to be easy. I think we're going to have a very significant recession. I think there are companies that are going to, unfortunately, that are going to have a hard time weathering and surviving this. I think a lot of families are going to be hurt because people are going to lose their jobs. They already have. There's a lot of pain that we're going to go through. But Americans are tough. We're going to get through the other side of this. And there might be some changes that we make to our lifestyle, but we'll be back.
Thank you. Could you maybe give us a little insight into your job at the SEC? Maybe the good, the bad, the indifferent, what do you do every day? Maybe a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. One of the things I always wonder when I talk to government officials is like, what's this guy's day-to-day like? Like, what's the job like? So let me tell you a little bit about that. So first of all, in the SEC, each commissioner the commission itself, the 5 commissioners, oversee thousands of employees. We have 5 divisions: the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, the Trading and Markets Division, the Division of Investment Management, Division of Corporation Finance, and our Enforcement Division. So we oversee the work of thousands of people. And I'll tell you, the number one best thing about that job is that these people are incredible public servants. These are some of the best lawyers, smartest people I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a few. And one thing you do is you get exposed to people who know their subject matter better than you ever will. So the first thing, Tom, know about the job of a commissioner is that you do so much at the SEC. I mean, everything from overseeing NYSE and trading to dealing with the transition from LIBOR to SOFR to thinking about whether you should sue a company for securities fraud, to thinking about who should disclose what and when. It's a broad set of challenges, and no one is ready for it. I'll speak for myself. I wasn't. I learned more in that job every day from talking to the staff who said, hey, Rob, we got this problem. Here's what we plan to do about it, and here's why. And you'd have to learn a whole new area of the law. Matter of fact, a lot of the things that I focused on as a commissioner, I didn't know anything about on my first day. And I learned from my colleagues on the staff who taught me a great deal. The other thing that you do on a day-to-day, so you see the staff, you help them make policy decisions. You spend a lot of time talking to the marketplace, Tom. If you're like me, I'm a guy who spent a lot of time in New York when I was on the commission. I also spent a lot of time in San Francisco and Chicago, because you have to be close to the markets to know what's coming around the corner. You need to be talking to people who are going to say to you, hey, look, we're a little worried about how the VIX is settling. We're a little worried about, options and collateral that's coming in on those at the end of that trading day. Conversations like that were very, very helpful to me over a long period of time. So that's something else you do. You spend a lot of time with the staff, you spend a lot of time with the market. And one more thing about the SEC, Tom, that's really special. I was very lucky, and that I worked with a tremendous, great chairman, Jay Clayton. And I spent a lot of time with Jay, talking about the various issues we were facing. We had all kinds of interesting debates about policy. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we disagreed, but we always did it respectfully. And I learned a lot from Jay. And I tried very hard to push him and argue with him and debate him the best that I could. Like I said, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I was very lucky to have a chairman who I consider a colleague and a friend, and somebody who I think we're very lucky to have in that position right now, because a lot of the steps that they've taken as a commission make a lot of sense and doing a lot to protect the market.
Yeah, I've always been impressed when I go to the SEC, and somebody like you has to know everything so broadly, right? People like me and other people can specialize in certain things. We could be a specialist in 606 or something and go down there, and then you have to act. And you've just come out of a meeting with some asset manager that has some issue having to do with research or something on that. So it's like it's great learning experience, I'm sure, being there, but it's not an easy job.
Well, that's exactly right. And look, here's a guy like me. I'm very lucky, because I've had enough jobs over the years. My father likes to say, if you take a look at my resume, it looks like I can't hold a job. I'm the kind of guy who's pretty good at knowing what I don't know. And I try to say to the staff, hey, look, I don't know what the answer is here. Here's what this guy told me. What do you think and why? And that's the best you can do, man. Every day you try and learn a little bit more, get a little better at the issues. Like you said, take 606. I thought a lot about stocks and liquidity before I got to the commission, but I hadn't dug into that level of detail. I had to learn that. And Brett Redfern, I'm not ashamed to tell you, Brett Redfern sat with me for hours and hours, walking me through exactly what he knew, what his positions were and why. Again, sometimes we agreed, sometimes we disagreed, but I learned a lot from Brett Redfern. And here's the great thing about that job, Tom. Think about who my teachers were. I learned equity market structure at the feet of Brett Redfern. I learned about corporate disclosure and leadership questions from Jay Clayton. I learned how to dissent and argue a point from Hester Peirce. I like to say I have had good teachers. When I practiced law, I worked for Marty Lipton. When I was an investment banker, I worked with Ace Greenberg. I like to say that I've had my share of good teachers, and that's how I tried to approach a job in Washington.
So is your father okay with your career now?
Oh my God, Tom. This boy, look, here's a funny thing. You have to understand that, and you know this, you have to understand that my mother and father are a big Irish Catholic family. My father's one of 5, my mother's one of 9. The only thing they wanted was for me to go to college. That was the dream, man. Maybe this kid will go to college. When I got my job at Bear Stearns, my father said, when he saw how much money I was making, my father said, if you ever leave this job, I'll never forgive you. And he wasn't lying. Because I'm not afraid to tell you that after I was confirmed as an SEC commissioner, I don't know if you guys remember this, but a couple of years ago, the All-Star game was held in Washington. And my father and I are big baseball fans. He came down to watch the game, and he met my staff. And my staff said to him, hey, look, Mr. Jackson, we understand that Rob feels like you don't think the return on investment from him going to law school was very high. Now that he's a commissioner, what do you think? And my father went, he's the kind of guy who thought, I was very, I've been lucky to have some good jobs. And I think he likes to say every career choice Rob has made has been another step for him making less money. So do it that what you will.
That's great. Well, we talked about specialization, and this was the kickoff at Goldman Sachs on April 7th, and then there's 4 seminars coming behind you, right? One is on improving productivity. That's technology and how technology helps. The other one's on digital assets. The fixed trading community is getting very involved in the whole crypto space. That's the second one. The third one, full life cycle. So that's the one, in the past on Wall Street, even at Bear Stearns, right, the focus was on the front office. Bear Stearns had a back office that, it's interesting. It was pretty good. They wound up taking over some of the ADP software, right? But they didn't get the focus. But now it's the full life cycle, and we're going to be talking about that in one of the webinars. And then the other one is trading automation, and that's transparency, and that's 606, consolidated audit trail, all of those topics having to do with transparency. So pick any of those 4 to talk about, and, that you feel strong about.
Sure. So, and like we said, let's definitely take some questions if you want to have a conversation. But let me talk about a couple of those things. So first of all, we could start with cryptocurrency. I have to tell you, of all the things that we worked on at the commission, I am most proud of some of the work we did on ICOs in 2017. I don't know if you remember this, Tom, but we had a period in 2017 and 2018 where the amount of fraud going on in the ICO space was really very troubling. And I got to be honest with you, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was one guy, I don't even think this was a case we brought, but I think someone else dealt with it. But there was one guy who had something called fake coin. Like he went on Twitter and marketed fake coin and said, hey, you want to buy my fake coin? And I thought to myself, look, this guy's got like a marketing problem. Like if he's a fraudster, he's not doing a good job. This guy raised $50 million. We had a moment in 2017 and 2018 where a lot of people were raising money in a way that didn't make business sense, that was inconsistent with the securities laws. And if I'm being honest, there are some lawyers out on the West Coast who gave, I thought, some pretty aggressive and pretty unwise advice about how the securities laws applied to that. Even before I got in the commission, Jay Clayton stamped that out. And he came forward and said, if you want to raise money on an ICO basis, you're almost certainly going to have to comply with the securities laws, and here's how that looks. And then we started digging into the harder questions about how do the securities laws apply, for example, to cryptocurrencies. Are they likely to be securities when they're first issued or when they're decentralized? Will there be a different view? And I think Bill Hinman gave a terrific speech last fall where he outlined some of those principles and did a good job guiding the market. Now, my guess is a lot of people on this call think the SEC could do even better in providing more guidance in this area. And let me say something about that. I hear you, and I don't think you're wrong, but it is very, very difficult for the government to keep up with a market that's changing at the speed that market is changing at. And that's particularly true when we have some folks on the commission right now who are very hesitant about the use of guidance. In other words, we've got a lot of people who are not so sure that the staff should be providing informal views or guidance to folks in the way that's sometimes necessary to keep up with a fast-moving market. And Tom, let me promise you something. If we had passed a rule on cryptocurrency or on ICOs or what have you in 2017 or 2018, that rule would have been obsolete the day we voted on it, because that market is simply moving too fast for people to believe that that a rulemaking process could keep up with it. So my own view is that the SEC has done a very good job in that area, and that market now has a lot more depth and liquidity and price discovery than it did when I was on the commission. And I think that we'll begin to move in a direction where the commission will provide more clear views to the market about what that space should look like. So that's one area where I really think we can and will do a little better, and where I think we did well while I was on the SEC. As to the market structure questions that you asked, I'm really proud of that work. We did the transaction fee pilot, which my office helped to oversee. when I was on the commission. That hasn't been launched yet, but I expect that it will be later this year, hopefully when the markets are somewhat past the current crisis. We made a significant progress on the consolidated audit trail, which I think was important. And we have more work to do in that area. But what I like about the approach that we've taken is that it's been based on the evidence rather than speculation about what the markets might look like. So I'll give you an example. We could easily have developed just out of the gate, based on what we heard from the market, rules on transaction fees. We could easily have done that, but we didn't. We chose instead to do a test of how the market would respond to different changes, different buckets, different kinds of changes in the way we exchanges pay transaction fees. I think that was the right approach. And it was a bipartisan approach. We did it unanimously, and I think we did the right thing. By contrast, I think some of the other steps that the commission has taken have been based more on intuition. And I can tell you, one thing that's hard about working in government is everybody has a view and everyone is sure that they're right. I'm hopeful that my colleagues will take a beat and step back and think about what the evidence can support in other areas, because I think what we've done in the market structure area has been particularly evidence driven. And that's one reason why I think we got to the right answer in many cases.
You mentioned consolidated audit trail. When I first met you, I was representing FIF at the time, right? And FIF has a great partnership with FIX on a lot of things, on using standards, on consolidated audit trail and other areas, right? And I went into your office, and you were there about 2 months or so, and I just said, "Hello, Commissioner." He said, "Well, call me Rob," and he said, "We were talking about CAT." He said, "But forgive me, I'm from the Bronx." He said, "We're really screwed, aren't we?"
I think,
and last night, the SEC came out, right? You probably had a chance to read it, right? With the deferment on it, and more importantly, a phased program on the implementation of CAT. And that was, I think, a really good example of working with the industry and the staff, right? In terms of, we're going to do CAT, but we're going to do it in a phased, control sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not inside the SEC anymore, so it's hard for me to say what I did see the order last night, and I read it in some detail. Hard to say what was going on there, but I think you're right that on CAT, so there's two basic problems. And Tom, we talked about it. You're being kind. My guess is, being from the Bronx, I didn't say screwed. I said something else. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, what we inherited on consolidated audit trail is a system where, because it's using an NMS plan, we basically inherited a system where we have responsibility but no control. I would say, with all respect to my friends who are on this call, the consolidated audit trail has taken too long. We could talk about who's to blame for that, but I can tell you right now, sitting in front of members of Congress, it's hard to explain why 8 years later we still don't have a CAT. And I think there's a lot of answers to that question, but fundamentally, I think we can also all agree that if the CAT were a profit center and not a cost center, it'd be built already. I think we really, as a market, as a community, need to get this thing done, man. Because I got to tell you, if we have a significant market event where we don't have the information we need as to exactly what happened, if we have another flash crash type situation and we don't have the CAT in place, we're going to regret it. Because so far, Congress has given the SEC the flexibility to work with the market. But the way you get laws that don't give flexibility is by taking too long to use that flexibility and get things stood up. So I agree with you, Tom, that we did that it's sensible to do it on a phased basis. Look, in the middle of COVID, can we expect people to make the deadlines they said they'd make pre-COVID? No. And I'm not trying to be an unreasonable guy. I do think as a marketplace, we'll be happier, and the long run health of the market will be better if we get that thing stood up as soon as we can.
Deborah, do we have any people raising their hand?
Not at this time, Tom. Yes, we do. Actually, yes. We have a question from Neil Scarth.
Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Hey, Neil, how you doing?
Good. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking the time. I was aware that the Council of Institutional Investors and the CFA Institute, Healthy Markets, and the SEC Investor Advisory Council had all recommended to the SEC last summer that post MiFID II and the way that unwound in Europe, that they were fine with the research commission system remaining in place, whereby asset managers, or asset owners rather, continue to pay for research. But in return, they wanted additional manager transparency, whereby they would be informed of how much they were going to pay, and they wanted some comfort that their research dollars were not basically subsidizing other investors, because many U.S. managers pay for their clients out of P&L in Europe and still charge U.S. asset owners. I just wondered if you could comment on the likelihood that this will be addressed by the current commission or the next commission in your view, and whether that was something that was resonating.
Well, first of all, Neil, thanks for that. And but before you, let me just ask you a quick follow-up. You saw the guidance that came out on this subject a few months back, right?
I saw the guidance in terms of the extension of the no action letters, but I don't think there was a specific reference to those recommendations that have been made by the organizations I referred to.
I agree with you. You're right. So just to be clear, to back up for those of you who maybe haven't followed this debate blow by blow the way it sounds like Neil has, we obviously have a fundamental problem, which is that the Europeans adopted MiFID II really, if I'm being honest, without taking too careful a look at the 40 Act and the limits that we have on in the United States on the ability to pay for research. I think I have to say, I don't want to, I'm not here to tell you the SEC is perfect, but I got to tell you, I think we did a good job on this. What we did was we provided some relief that signaled to the marketplace, if you're making adjustments to the way you handle domestic research payments that reflect the reality of what happened in MiFID, we understand that. And we're going to be sure there's oversight. We're going to have questions. We're going to require you to follow certain conditions, but we're going to give you no action relief, and we're going to extend that no action relief beyond the next election here in the States. Neil, the bottom line is we have to do something more permanent on this. I hope you'll agree.
Yeah, I think the only other point I'd make is because in Europe, so many asset managers have gone to funding research out of their own P&L. It's not transparent to asset owners. And in an environment where markets are going down, AUM is going down, and manager profitability is going down, you don't want to have a pro-cyclical situation where the lower markets go, the less research the manager has, because there's this conflict between profitability and doing the right thing for the client.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if I'm being honest, I think we need a permanent solution here. I think, Neil, the problem is that the law we have on the books limits what we can do.
Sure.
And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I had lots of conversations in the commission. This was an issue I focused on. I worked with Brett on it. I worked with Dahlia on it. I worked with Jay on it. And all of the above want to do the right thing. But look, the legal flexibility we have under the 40 Act is not ideal. I'll tell you my view about this. We need, and it sounds like you're on the same page, we need some more transparency.
Right.
If I could snap my fingers, that's what I'd get. I would say we get more soup to nuts transparency and who's paying for what out of what P&L, on what basis, what are you getting in exchange for that? Are you confident you're getting research and service that's valuable to your investors? And that's the road I would go down. Neil, ideally we'd get a statute, right?
Well, I mean, once again, yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really comment on that. It's just that obviously it seems like a reasonable quid pro quo if asset owners are going to fund this to just have some greater transparency around it. And I guess, once again, I understand why the commission would prefer voluntary disclosure. We have evidence to suggest that managers have been less voluntary about this than asset owners might have appreciated.
I'm not surprised.
Deb, do we have other questions queued up?
Yes, Tom, you have a question from Chris Bach.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, Commissioner Jackson. This is Chris Bach from FIF.
Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Good. How are you? We've met a couple of times. I'm going to call you Rob because you've asked me to call you Rob every time we've met. I'm just curious where you think we are in terms of your prior research before I go into the commission, and many of your statements focus on, as you just said, the need for transparency, protecting the individual investor, really fundamental fairness. Over the past couple of years, we've seen what I think is good movement. CAT is up and running. That's going to aside from determine large market events, also determine nefarious activity for specific investors. 606 is providing more order route and transparency. Reg BI, the fiduciary standard around how registered investment advisors should act, et cetera. Where do you think we are, or where do you think we are in terms of where we need to be to protect the individual mom and pop type investor?
On Chris, just one on all those issues on fiduciary.
Just like so we have the movement towards more transparency,
Yep.
more disclosure. Do you think we're there, and where do you think we need to go if we're not there?
Okay, got it. Well, thank you. So first of all, thanks for calling me Rob. Chris will tell you that I asked people to call me Rob when I was on the commission because every time my father would use commissioner, it would be like it would be when he thought I said something stupid. So like, when the Yankees signed Garrett Cole, I was like worried about giving him 9 years. And I called my father and I was talking to him, and he would say, "Listen, Commissioner." So that's why I prefer people call me Rob. I'm hearing it the other way. Chris wants to know, Rob, are we doing enough on transparency? And I think the answer to this is obviously no. And here, Chris, I actually think here I have a principled disagreement with some of my former colleagues on the commission, and it's okay to disagree, but we should identify why we disagree. So we have adopted rules on disclosure over the last little while that are flexible. They are principles based. And look, who can object to flexibility, man? Who can object to principles based ideas? Not me. I'm not against it. But the problem with having nothing but flexible principles-based rules is that what you're doing essentially is leaving to public companies and their advisors what they want to disclose and when they want to disclose it. And the effects of that are that you'll, on balance, get less disclosure than you otherwise might. Now, by the way, I'm not a guy who thinks that transparency and disclosure is a solution to every problem under the sun. I do think sunlight is a good disinfectant, but it often can be counterproductive, and you have to balance these things. But for me, while I was on the commission, my colleagues moved very far in a direction of leaving it up to companies when they should have to disclose. My problem with that is that the basic bargain of the securities laws is a regime of mandatory disclosure. Why? You can imagine, suppose we had no disclosure rules at all. We didn't have to disclose 10Ks, 10Qs, nothing. Well, look, good companies would voluntarily disclose information. We wouldn't need a law to convince them to do that. They would put that information out there to raise money from investors. Bad companies would disclose less. And the problem is investors wouldn't know the difference. So what they would do, and this is a standard Lemons problem that justified the 33 and 34 Acts, what would happen is that good companies would get less capital than they should. They would exit the market, and systematically you get bad companies in the market. That's why it's called the Lemons problem. So this is the reason why we mandate some disclosure. And I would respectfully disagree with those colleagues of mine who would say that we should not require more clear transparency about, for example, things companies are doing on the cyber front. So I'll give you an example, Chris. I gave a speech 6 months into my time on the commission saying that I took some public data on hacks at publicly traded companies, and I looked to see how many of those companies filed an 8K. So there's a hack. You're required to tell your customers and the attorney general of some states, et cetera, whether or not you had a hack. I take those data and look to see what percentage of those public companies 8K'd it. 97% of those companies didn't file a K. Now, when I told that to my colleagues, they said, well, that must mean 97% of the time it's not material. Nah, no. What it means is that 97% of the time, lawyers who bill by the hour and get paid to advise corporate management who don't want to disclose tell them it's okay not to disclose. That's what it means. Now, I got all kinds of ideas about how to solve that problem. You can nudge and encourage people to disclose. That's what the SEC did while I was there. We put guidance out on that subject, and we did make some progress. You can have guys like Bill Hinman in the Division of Corporation Finance push people to do better disclosure, and my colleagues have done some of that even since I stepped down. But at the end of the day, Chris, we need to require companies to disclose things they'd rather not disclose. That's what a mandatory regime is. And when you give people flexibility, you could expect them to use it. Now, I just want to say, that doesn't make me against flexibility. In a lot of areas, I'm happy to leave transparency to flexible decision-making. But there's areas where it doesn't make sense to do that, and I've talked a little bit about those publicly. I'll just give you one straightforward example. I did a paper a few years ago that shows a company, when something material happens to a company, they've got 4 days to disclose it. That's a good example of a flexible rule that allows people to choose how and when they disclose stuff. What I showed in this paper is that a lot of companies that take the 4 days to disclose have executives who trade before that event. And they make very substantial profits doing that trading. That to me, Chris, is a sign of a gap in our securities laws. That's unhealthy, in my humble view. And the SEC ought to do something about it. We should require more speedy disclosure. By the way, well-advised large companies tend to disclose within 24 hours. But there are some people out there who'd rather wait 4 days and trade on it. And I would say that our disclosure rules should be set up in a way not to allow ordinary investors to get taken advantage of like that.
Deborah?
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, how about market data? We've had roundtables on market data. Never had those before. You've spoken a little bit about it. So what's your thought about the market data infrastructure that we have in our environment?
So, I gave a speech about this while I was on the commission, and to me, when we were talking about the cat earlier, Tom, and I told you, hey, man, we're screwed. To me, the basic problem with cat, if I had to explain it over dinner with my father, would be this. We made the basic management 101 mistake of giving ourselves responsibility, but no control. Yeah? We said, we're the SEC, we're in charge of standing up the cap, but we're going to leave it to somebody else. And that makes it not that surprising to me that 10 years later, there's no cap. Similarly, with market data, we set up governance in a way that was never going to work from a very basic point of view. Here's why. So, as you all know, the 75 amendments and a number of other NMS-like rules set up a situation where there's where the SIP is available, it's provided. We can debate the rates, but the SIP is sort of a publicly available set of data on prices. And then you've got privately run feeds, and those are very profitable, run by the exchanges, and designed to be deeper and more precise and speedier than the SIP. And when I tell law students this, I say, now here's how the world actually works. The same exchanges who run the data feeds run the SIP. And I got to tell you guys, when I try, I just, now that I'm back as a professor, I teach this stuff. And when I teach it, I have students be like, you got to be kidding. Like, real? Is that in America? That's how the stock market works? We have the same people who are competing with, and the way I described it when I was a commissioner is said, this is a little bit like letting Barnes & Noble run the public library and then being surprised that the public library sucks. You shouldn't be. It's in Barnes & Noble's interest. They actually, in a way, have an obligation to their shareholders for the library to suck. And that's why we have the market data situation we do in this country. Now, I got to say, and again, I know this sounds like a rah-rah session about my old friends at the SEC, but man, on this, they have done great, great stuff. I was part of some of it where we did, we did a proposal on governance of market data that I'm very proud of. The idea is now out there of having some competition about the provision of centralized securities data, very powerful idea. We've done a little bit about governance of the exchanges, price setting on data. I think we could have gone further there, and I wish that we had, and I explained why in a dissent that I published that day, but I also understood that, not everybody agrees with us about this, and so we need to move carefully and thoughtfully. But here's what I'll say. After years of inaction, I mean, how many years, Tom, did the market come into the SEC and say, this system is not working? These are not competitive prices. These guys are extracting quite substantial rents, and we can't stop them because we have no other choice but to buy their data, in part because of your rules. How many years did they come in and get ignored? But with Brett and Jay leading the way, I think we've made a lot of progress on that stuff. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next because I'm very proud of the work on market data. And look, at the end of the day, by the way, the exchanges are entitled to make a profit. I'm not against that. But it should be competitive forces that drive the way they set those prices, not the fact that they get to run the public good and the one that competes with it. Not the fact that our law and best execution rules more or less get closer to mandating that people buy their stuff. That's not how competitive markets make profit, and I think we made a lot of progress on that in this administration.
Tom, we have a question from Lee Saber.
Okay, go ahead, Lee, please.
Hello. Hi, Commissioner Jackson. Really appreciate you joining us today. And, the fixed trading community overall, this is great to have you sharing your insights. That said, I have a question around digital securities or digital assets. What type of future do you see, for blockchain-based digital assets playing in the world of, say, global finance? And my question really not only pertains to permissionless blockchains like, pure crypto like Bitcoin, but also in the regulated space, maybe private placements and, the securities arena. And lastly, for the record, I totally agree with the work that you guys did on shutting off the ICOs. That was a nightmare, and you guys killed that one, which was great. So thank you.
Just so you know, Commissioner Lee is the co-chair of FIX, and he left a very stable organization called Wellington to go into the crypto asset space. So, that's his background. But go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, Lee, thanks for saying those kind words about the ICO work. But I got to tell you, that was a lot of it was done before I even arrived. That was really Jay taking the bull by the horns. And let me just make a footnote about that. Jay was a law partner for a long time. It's not an easy thing to become the chairman of the SEC and look some lawyers in the eye and say, you got this one wrong. And especially hard to do your first few months on the job. And that's exactly what he did with the people who gave some pretty aggressive advice on the ICO side. And I just tip my cap. I think he did the right thing. So I'm glad to hear you say you think the same way. Let me say a little bit about digital assets, because one of the things that was strange to me during my time on the commission. Look, I knew about blockchain. I'm not an expert. It sounds like you know a lot more about it, Lee. But my thought about blockchain was this is incredibly exciting technology, because it provides independently verifiable, auditable data on in ways that are going to revolutionize things like securities, issues like legending and custody and all those hard questions. Or Lee, if you like, think about what it could do for audit. Mm-hmm. Verification of transactions. I mean, they've already begun to change the audit world in that space, and it'll bring down audit fees, and it'll be great for companies. There's lots of upside there. I got to tell you, Lee, when I heard about the blockchain technology, it didn't occur to me that the first application of it would be money. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but we have money, and it works okay. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but sovereign currency has been all right for the United States for the last pair of centuries, and it wasn't obvious to me that the highest and best use of blockchain technology would be in the currency space, that it would be in other areas. And I wonder what your reaction to that is, Lee, because I think I'm not at all knocking cryptocurrency. I think there's a lot of value there, especially on the payment system side. But I think the applications in the security space for, as you say, private placements and other uses of the technology are as or even more exciting in the long run. What do you think?
I totally agree with your last part of the statement. And as far as the currency angle goes, I think it's pretty interesting because, one of your counterparts, I guess, at the CFTC, Chris Giancarlo, is proposing the digital dollar project, which would be a U.S. federal, the Federal Reserve administering a digitally based dollar, which I think is pretty exciting. And, and even just one of the small areas that makes this even more relevant, I think right now in the days of COVID-19 is that, money doesn't have to be transferred from hand to hand to hand anymore. You're not going to transmit it. And, there was a great article in the Wall Street Journal back in, I think, maybe January or February saying, the U.S. Federal Reserve System was quarantining dollars and or just, bills in general that were coming from overseas and or destroying them. Well, you don't have, if it's coming over your phone or some other technology piece, you don't have to worry about that angle as well. And I know it's just a small piece of the overall concept around digital currencies, but I think we do need to consider these things because China is clearly getting involved with this. They have a pilot program, from what I understand, coming out next month where they're going to administer digital dollars to some of their workforce that work for the government, and they have to take half of their pay in conventional money and then the other half in digital money. And they have to learn how to open up wallets and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious to hear more about your thoughts. I mean, I have my own opinions, which are, probably long-winded, but I'm more curious to see like what, as you've recently stepped away from the SEC, like what are your just overall thoughts on those market improvements? I know you touched on how does the SEC keep up with these technology innovations, and I think there's a balance there, right? Because we are moving faster and faster, and I don't think it's going to slow down too much. So like I think we got to figure out better ways to test this stuff out, but also not hurt ourselves.
Yeah, so I think so first of all, Lee, I agree with you. I think going forward, there's going to be a lot of demand for payment systems that avoid physical touch. And I do think there's exciting stuff to think about and talk about on the digital currency side in terms of payments. As an asset, it's a little trickier, although there's lots of interesting things happening there too. I think you're right that it's a balance in terms of the SEC keeping abreast of stuff like this. I want to say one more thing about that, which is, look, I understand why I have colleagues who are skeptical about the use of guidance. They feel like the SEC staff sometimes goes a little further or makes law in a way that's unhealthy. And I'm not sure that that's wrong. And in fact, this administration has come out very forcefully against guidance. But guys, I want to tell you something. The only way for a federal agency to keep pace with something as fast as digital currency is through guidance. Because our rulemaking you want to talk about something that takes a long time. Rulemaking process from soup to nuts at the SEC, even the chairman's top priority in that building can't move quicker than a couple of years. And as I said earlier, by the time 2 years ago, that's a lifetime for something in the life of that's moving as fast as digital currency. So here's what I want to say about that, Lee. I think we're in the first inning of the story on digital currency. I'm a baseball guy, so I think we're just getting started here.
And that's good, because I think we just get out of batting practice. So I'm not even sure we've taken the field yet, the game hasn't officially started.
So it's a very exciting place to be. And I understand why a lot of very smart people who've had a lot of success in traditional finance are moving there. You're not the only one. There's a lot of people who've taken that step, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm glad that the SEC early in that game, maybe even before it started, got a reputation for doing the hard and right thing on ICOs, because I think we're going to need that reputation again in the future in that space before too long.
Yeah, you heard that, Tom, right? You said he thought I did the right thing.
Yeah, before we get into a discussion on the New York Yankees versus the Boston Red Sox, let me ask because we're out of time. Let me ask and I think you did some of it already, Commissioner, the exit question, right? From your time there, lessons for our audience from your time on the commission, if you could just share that with us.
Sure. Well, first of all, something that I didn't know, because look, I've been critical of the SEC. I worked at Bear Stearns. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like when the phone rang and someone said, "Hey, the SEC's looking for you," that was a happy day. Nobody likes that idea. Nobody thinks of the SEC as a partner in the markets. But the first thing I would say is really good people work there, and they're trying hard to do the right thing. I know sometimes it can feel like the SEC is a pain in the ass. I think sometimes it can feel like people are being very hard on companies and market participants. But in the main, you got 4,000 people there who believe in American capital markets, who are proud of the way that they work, and who want to get things right. Now, that said, I've been critical of the place, and you should too. That's how we make better government. But the first thing I would say is good people work there. It's important to know and keep that in mind when you're thinking about dealing with a place like the SEC, number one. Number two, if I could change one thing about my experience at the SEC, I would have gotten even more input from the market. When I used to go give public talks, I would give out my email address. One reason I did that is that a lot of people thought the way to email someone at the SEC is last name, first letter @sec.gov. So I was Jackson R, except there was this poor paralegal in the New York regional office. He was Jackson R. This poor guy got thousands of freaking emails from lobbyists all over the place. Poor guy. I was Jackson R.O. So I used to give it out for that, but I also gave it out because in my typical day, I would hear from the big lobbying advocacy organizations all the time. But I wouldn't always hear from a guy who would call me up and say, you know what, I've been running investment management. I've been running some money for about 5 years. I'm having to let people go. It's a difficult transition. Here's the things that are slowing us down. Here's the things that make it hard for me to compete. just that candid market feedback. If I were you, I would be even more in touch with the SEC. And believe it or not, I know this is hard to believe, but all 4 of the current people on that commission want to hear from you. They all have their views. They all have their perspectives. I'm not saying that they're going to agree with you, but they'll all hear you out, especially Jay, who, in my experience, would take almost any meeting. He won't sit there and tell you you're right when he thinks that you're wrong, but he'll hear you out. And so I would urge people to be more in touch with the commission. I know a lot of you think, well, I'll just go through my trade group, or I'll leave it to so-and-so who's talking to such and such. That's fine, but there's nothing wrong with sharing your own perspectives. It's your government, and you're in the marketplace. If I could have changed a thing, I would have heard more from the market. And then finally, I think something to keep in mind is how hard it is to keep a commission independent in this political environment. This is a tough moment politically, folks. Whether putting coronavirus to one side, which I can't even imagine what it's like there now, but this is a challenging moment. And people are trying to keep the commission independent of political considerations. I'm not going to say they always succeed, but I think they're trying very hard to do that. It's very important to our markets. So things like members of Congress throwing things in our budget that make it so we can do this or can't do that, or these are very damaging things to the market. And if I could snap my fingers and change anything else about the SEC, it would be to get us off the annual budget process and give the commissioners and the staff some freedom to do the right thing. I'm not against accountability. I understand why people have the view they do about that, but I think the risk of politics encroaching the commission has never been higher. And I'm really glad that people there are there now, because I know they're independent-minded, thoughtful folks, and I hope they stay that way.
Well, Commissioner, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much for your years on the commission. And we're just going to stay in touch, right? Because, you can tell you're passionate about this business, and, we're close by when we go back to our offices, right? We're close by, so we'll be in touch. But thank you so much for...
I look forward to continuing the conversation. I always enjoyed hearing from you and your colleagues when I was on the commission. I look forward to staying in touch. And hopefully next time we talk, you won't be looking at my living room.
Perfect. Right.
Right.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Tom and Commissioner Jackson, for that insightful discussion. A lot of the topics mentioned during this meeting, FIX already is on top of: regulation, cryptocurrency, transparency. And so just wanted to cover off a couple of initiatives so people know that these are out there. These are groups that you can join as a FIX trading community member. Right now we have a European consolidated tape, which is focused on providing clear and unambiguous consolidated tape in Europe. We have a fixed income and equity subgroup addressing that issue. Execution, venue, and transparency. That group provides guidance on tags 29, 30, and 851. They work with the Global Buy-Side Committee on the Industry RTI initiative. We're kicking off a full life cycle and ecosystem working group, which will assess the full life cycle of a trade, identify gaps to ensure connection from front to back. Cryptocurrency, as the commissioner spoke with a couple of our attendees today, we have our co-chairs of that group are engaged in the ISO Digital Token Identifier Standard Group, the DTI. They provide educational content on regulatory and market trends and trying to understand how FIX can fit into this space. We also have our FIX Orchestra Working Group, which is developing the standard, which takes the rules of engagement between two counterparties. Typically, we find that in PDFs and Word, and making that machine readable. And then also the MOST working group, which is exploring monitoring, onboarding, and software testing, looking to improve quality and efficiency of platforms and decrease the time to market. We also have a number of other large groups that are on the global side. The Buy-Side Committee, this is a buy-side only group that creates a neutral environment for participants to discuss their pain points and explore solutions. Member Services Committee, which addresses any kind of member issues within the FIX trading community. Our Technical Committee, the backbone of the organization, they review technical extensions proposed for the protocol. And then the Post-Trade Working Group, which last year this group worked on payments. We're now moving into netting, repos, and securities lending. These are just some of our groups. There are many more. And again, as you're an employee of a FIX trading community member firm and you're interested in obtaining more information, just contact the program office, fix@fixtrading.org. So I want to thank everybody again today for joining. Stay safe and be healthy.